When I said, "Daughter, I am so happy about your wedding tomorrow," she fell completely silent. My son-in-law, still new to our family, gave a strange laugh and said, "The wedding was a week ago." For a moment, I thought he was joking, but when I looked at my daughter's face, pale and full of guilt, I realized it wasn't a joke. They had really gotten married without me. My heart sank. I had spent months planning, saving, preparing to give her the best wedding I could. I even bought a new suit and had my late wife's favorite flowers ordered for the ceremony. But they decided to do it alone. My own daughter, my only child, didn't want me there. I asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away and mumbled, "Dad, we wanted something small, private. We didn't want drama." Drama? What drama? I had never caused a scene in my life. I was just an old man trying to see his daughter happy. But that day, something broke inside me. I smiled politely, congratulated them, and walked back into my empty house. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the wedding invitation that never came. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever since her mother passed. A week later, I heard a knock on my door. It was them. My daughter looked desperate, her husband nervous. "Dad," she said, "we need your help." Apparently, they had run into financial trouble. The venue they secretly booked refused to refund them because they hadn't paid in full. They wanted me to help cover it, to pay for the wedding I wasn't even invited to. I stood there quietly, staring at them, my hands trembling. My heart wanted to help my daughter, but my pride, my broken father's heart, was louder. "You got married without me," I said softly. "You didn't want me there when it mattered, and now you want me when you're in trouble." She started crying. "Dad, please, we made a mistake." But I could see her husband's eyes, cold, distant, like he was only there for the money. That's when I realized this wasn't about family. It was about convenience. I took a deep breath, looked straight into his eyes, and said firmly, "Get out of here." They froze. My daughter's tears rolled down her cheeks, but I didn't move. For once, I stood up for myself. After they left, I sat down in my chair, my heart heavy but strangely calm. I had lost my daughter long before that wedding, but maybe, just maybe, she'd realize what family really means. A month passed since that night, and not a single word came from my daughter. Every morning, I'd sit by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the mailman pass by, secretly hoping for a letter, a message, anything. But there was nothing. The house felt colder than usual, emptier too. I tried to distract myself by fixing the fence, repainting the porch, or trimming the hedges, things I had promised to do for years but never found time for. Yet every sound, every corner of the house reminded me of her. I still remember when she was 5, running around in the backyard with her mother's hat on, shouting, "Daddy, look, I'm a bride." Back then, I laughed and said, "Not too soon, princess." I never imagined she'd actually get married without me. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, but picked up. It was her. Her voice was weak, tired. "Dad, I'm sorry," she whispered. My chest tightened. "Are you okay?" I asked quickly. She hesitated, then said, "Can I come home? Just for a few days?" My heart said yes instantly, but my pride held me back. "What about your husband?" I asked. There was silence. Then a soft, trembling reply. "He left, Dad. He said he couldn't handle our problems anymore." I closed my eyes. The man who had laughed at me now walked away from her. Part of me was angry at him for hurting her, and angry at her for realizing too late. But still, she was my daughter. The next morning, I found her standing at my doorstep, suitcase in hand,
eyes swollen from crying. Without a word, I opened the door. She stepped in, and the smell of home hit her like a wave. For a long time, we didn't speak. We just sat there, side by side, like two people who had lost the same thing. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought keeping it small would avoid arguments, but I ended up losing everything." I looked at her and said, "You didn't lose everything. You still have me." That broke her. She started crying harder, the kind of tears that come from deep regret. Days went by. Slowly, she began to heal. She'd cook breakfast, clean the house, even fix old photo frames of her mother. One afternoon, I saw her holding her mother's wedding ring, the one I had kept after the funeral. "Mom would have been so disappointed," she said quietly. I placed my hand on hers. "Your mother loved you no matter what, and so do I." For the first time in months, she smiled. But deep down, I knew there was something more. She wasn't just back because of heartbreak. There was fear in her eyes, something she wasn't saying. A few nights later, I woke up to noise outside. The porch light flickered, and I saw a shadow near the gate. I stepped out, and there he was, my son-in-law. "What are you doing here?" I asked sharply. His clothes were messy, his eyes restless. "I just need to talk to her," he said. "You had your chance," I replied. He took a step closer. "You don't understand, sir. She took something that belongs to me." My blood boiled. "She doesn't owe you anything," I shouted. He clenched his fists, his voice low. "It's not what you think. I just need the papers." "Papers? What papers?" I looked back through the door where my daughter stood frozen. Her face turned pale. "Dad, don't let him in." I stood firm between them. "Leave before I call the police." He stared at me, his expression twisting with anger, then turned and stormed off into the darkness. My daughter collapsed to the floor, shaking. I held her close, demanding answers. With tears running down her cheeks, she said, "Dad, he took loans in my name. We owe thousands, Dad. I didn't even know until after the wedding." I felt my knees weaken. All that pride, all that hurt, suddenly didn't matter anymore. My daughter was trapped, scared, and alone. "We'll figure it out," I told her firmly. "You're not alone this time." Over the next few days, we went through every document, every bill, every message. The debts were real. He had forged her signature, spent her savings, and disappeared. But I wasn't about to let that man destroy her future. I reached out to an old friend, a lawyer who owed me a favor from years back. He agreed to take the case. Meanwhile, I saw a change in my daughter. She wasn't the same timid girl who once avoided confrontation. She was stronger now, broken, yes, but determined. One morning, as we sat together over breakfast, she said, "Dad, I want to make things right. I want to rebuild, not run away." I looked at her, seeing the spark of the woman her mother would have been proud of. "Then that's exactly what we'll do," I said. That day, she went out and applied for a job. Watching her walk down the street, shoulders straight, head high, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a bridge. And maybe, after all that pain, we were finally walking across it together.
Weeks passed, and things slowly began to change. My daughter, Emily, started working at a small flower shop downtown. Every morning she'd leave with a nervous smile, holding her mother's locket in her hand for courage. I watched her from the window, feeling a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. The case against her ex-husband, Mark, was still ongoing, but at least now she had purpose. My lawyer friend, George, had gathered enough proof to expose everything: fake signatures, loan documents, and even voice messages where Mark bragged about using Emily's credit to start a business under his own name. It was clear he never loved her, just her stability and family connections. One afternoon, George called. "We got a court date," he said.
You both need to be there." My stomach twisted. I knew it would be hard for Emily to face him again, but she nodded firmly when I told her. "I'm ready," she said. The morning of the hearing, the air felt heavy. Emily wore a simple white dress and tied her hair back, her eyes calm but sharp. I sat beside her, holding her hand. When Mark entered the courtroom, his once confident grin was gone. He looked tired, desperate, almost hollow. As the evidence rolled out, I watched Emily stand tall, voice steady as she told her story. She didn't cry, didn't stutter. The judge listened carefully, and when it was over, he turned to Mark with a cold stare. "This is fraud," he said. "You will be held responsible for your actions." Hearing those words, Emily let out a breath she had been holding for months. Mark was ordered to repay the loans and serve community service time. Justice wasn't everything, but it was enough. After the hearing, we walked out into the sunlight. Emily stopped and looked at me. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, fighting back tears. "You gave me a reason to keep going, sweetheart." That evening, we sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky glowed orange and pink, the same colors as her mother's favorite roses. Emily rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom would have loved this," she whispered. I nodded. "She's watching. Trust me." For the first time in a long while, peace settled over us. But deep down, I sensed this wasn't the end. A few days later, strange things started happening. Late-night phone calls with no one speaking on the other end, a car parked near the house that drove off whenever I stepped outside. I didn't want to alarm Emily, but I knew something wasn't right. One night, as I was locking up, I noticed the porch light flicker again, just like that night Mark showed up. My gut tightened. I grabbed the flashlight and walked quietly out. There, by the old oak tree, I saw someone standing in the shadows. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer. The figure turned slowly and disappeared into the dark woods behind the house. I stood frozen for a moment, then hurried back inside. Emily was waiting, pale and trembling. "Dad, what happened?" Before I could answer, we heard another sound, the creak of a floorboard from the living room. Someone was inside. I motioned her to stay quiet as I stepped forward. The beam of light landed on a man crouching near the cabinet. It was him, Mark. "You shouldn't have done this," he hissed. My pulse raced. "You need to leave now," I warned him. He took a step closer, holding something metallic in his hand, a crowbar. Emily screamed. I stood between them, heart pounding. "You want to hurt someone? You'll go through me first." For a few seconds, time froze. Then headlights flashed through the window, police cars pulling up outside. Mark turned to run, but two officers burst in and tackled him to the floor. Emily fell into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's over," I whispered, holding her tight. But even as they led Mark away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but wonder what scars he'd left behind, not just on her life, but on her heart. Days turned into weeks after that terrifying night. Mark was behind bars now, but his presence still haunted the corners of our minds. The house that once felt like a safe place now seemed fragile, like one loud noise could break the peace again. Emily tried to act strong, but I could see it. The sleepless nights, the way she double-checked every lock before bed, the faint tremor in her voice whenever the phone rang. She'd startle at every sound outside, even if it was just the wind brushing against the windows. One morning, I found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at the sunrise with empty eyes. "I keep hearing his voice in my dreams," she said softly, "telling me it's not over." I sat beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. "He's gone, Emily. You're safe now." She nodded, but I knew she didn't fully believe it. I decided it was time for a change, something that would help her breathe again. We packed our things and moved to a small town 2 hours away, a quiet place surrounded by woods and open fields. The house we rented was old but peaceful, with creaking floors and the smell of pine trees drifting in through the windows. I told her, "Here we start fresh. No more shadows, just new memories." For a while, life was calm. She got a job at the local library and even started making friends again. I'd see her laughing with the neighbor's kids or reading outside under the oak tree. Her smile was returning slowly, like sunlight after a storm. But peace never stays too long when the past refuses to die. One evening while I was fixing the fence, Emily came running out, her phone trembling in her hand. "Dad, look at this," she said, her face pale. It was a letter. No return address. Slipped under the library's door. It read, "You think you can hide? I always find what's mine." My blood went cold. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Mark's. I immediately called the sheriff from our new town, Officer Daniels. He took the note, assuring us that Mark was still locked up and there was no way he could have sent it. "Probably someone messing with you," he said, trying to calm her down, but his eyes showed doubt. That night, I made sure every door and window was locked. I even placed a chair under the front door handle just in case. But as the clock hit 2 a.m., I heard something faint. A car engine idling somewhere near the house. I peeked through the curtain, but the road was empty. The next morning, tire marks appeared at the edge of the driveway. They weren't ours. Emily started shaking again. She whispered, "He's out. I can feel it." I didn't want to admit it, but deep inside, I felt it too. A week later, we got confirmation. The sheriff came by early in the morning, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Jameson, Mark's been released on parole," he said. I felt the ground sink beneath me. "What? How? After breaking in?" He sighed. "Overcrowded prison. He served enough time." I looked at Emily, her face frozen in fear. Officer Daniels assured us they'd keep an eye out, but I could tell he didn't have the resources for constant watch. We were on our own again. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table, silent, staring at the small candle burning between us. "Dad, what if he comes here?" she asked. "Then he'll find out we're not afraid anymore," I said, trying to sound confident though my voice cracked. I didn't want to show it, but fear was crawling under my skin too. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that letter over and over in my head. The phrase, "I always find what's mine," kept echoing in the darkness. I went to check the front yard around 3 a.m., flashlight in hand. The moonlight stretched across the gravel path, and for a moment everything was silent, until I saw it. A small shape, half hidden under the mailbox. A second letter. I froze before picking it up. The paper was the same rough texture, same handwriting, but this one said something worse. "You can run again, but not forever." My heart pounded as I looked around the quiet fields, nothing but darkness and whispering wind. I rushed inside and locked the door. Emily was already awake, standing in the hallway. Her eyes widened when she saw the letter. "Dad, we have to leave again." I shook my head. "No, this time we fight." I called George, my old lawyer friend, told him everything. He promised to contact a private investigator to trace where the letters came from. Meanwhile, I set up cameras around the property, hidden ones that could record movement outside. But even with all that, each night felt longer, heavier, filled with uncertainty. A few days later, one of the cameras caught something. A shadow moving behind the barn at midnight. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a hood. I paused the footage, heart thumping hard. It wasn't clear enough to see his face, but deep down I knew who it was. I showed the video to Emily. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dad, it's him! He found us!" I looked at her and said, "Not this time. We end this once and for all." That night, I sat by the window, lights off, watching the woods outside. The air was cold and still. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. The storm wasn't over yet, and when it came, this time, I would be ready to protect my daughter no matter the cost. The night air felt thick, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I sat in the living room, lights off, watching the front yard through the thin crack of the curtain. My old shotgun rested across my lap, unloaded, but ready to warn if I had to. The clock ticked louder than usual, each sound like a heartbeat, counting down to something unseen. Emily was upstairs trying to sleep, but I knew she couldn't. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Every time the wind brushed against the house, she'd wake up clutching the blanket as if the walls could vanish any moment. I kept replaying that video in my head. The shadow near the barn, the way it moved slowly, confidently, like it knew we were watching. It wasn't random. Mark was back, and he wanted us scared. That was his game. But not this time. This time, I'd end it once and for all. It was around 2:17 a.m. when I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. My pulse spiked. I turned off my flashlight and crouched by the window. Sure enough, a figure emerged from the darkness, a man moving along the fence line, his head turning toward the house with slow, deliberate motion. The pale moonlight caught the glint of something metallic in his hand. It was him, Mark. I felt rage boil in my chest, but I stayed still, watching, waiting. He stopped by the porch, looked directly toward the window where I hid, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he disappeared around the back. I moved fast, silent, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone and texted Officer Daniels, "He's here." Then I crept toward the back door. The motion sensor light flicked on outside, and for a split second I saw him clearly. Same face, same cold smirk that haunted Emily's dreams. He was prying at the back door with a crowbar. I shouted, "Mark, don't move!" He froze for a second, then turned slowly, a twisted grin stretching across his face. "You really thought you could keep her from me," he said, voice low and venomous. I held my ground. "She's not yours. She never was." He took a step closer, and I could see the madness in his eyes. "You think you can protect her from me? She'll always be mine," he shouted, banging the crowbar against the doorframe. I yelled for Emily to stay upstairs, but I heard her footsteps on the stairs. "Dad!" she cried. I turned for a moment, and that's when he lunged forward. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy lamp, and swung it with all my strength. It hit his arm, knocking the crowbar away. He stumbled back, growling in pain, but before I could move again, he tackled me to the floor. The struggle was wild, chaotic. My shoulder hit the ground hard as we fought over control of the weapon. I could smell the dirt and sweat on him, hear his ragged breathing close to my ear. He whispered, "You ruined everything." I gritted my teeth. "You did that yourself." Then I heard it. The sirens faint in the distance. He heard it too, and panic flashed in his eyes. He shoved me back and ran toward the back door, crashing through it just as the police lights flashed outside. Emily ran to me crying, "Dad, are you okay?" I nodded, breathing hard. "Stay inside," I said. Police cars screeched to a stop, officers flooding the yard. Mark tried to run through the woods, but they caught him before he could disappear this time. They dragged him back in handcuffs, kicking and shouting obscenities. I stood at the doorway watching as they shoved him into the car. He looked at me one last time through the window, his smile crooked and broken. "This isn't over," he mouthed, before the door slammed shut. The red and blue lights faded down the road until all that was left was silence. Emily held on to me tightly, shaking. "Dad, what if he comes back again?" she whispered. I looked at her, still catching my breath, and said, "He won't. He's done hurting us." But even as I said it, I felt that same chill crawl up my spine. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel safe anymore. The next morning, Officer Daniels came by to check on us. He'll be transferred to a state facility this time. No parole, no leniency. He's finished. Emily nodded but stayed silent. Her eyes looked distant, as if part of her still didn't believe it. I tried to get her to rest, but she spent the day cleaning every corner of the house, like she was trying to erase his memory from the walls. That night, she finally slept peacefully for the first time in months. I stayed awake, watching the stars outside, thinking of everything that had happened. The love, the betrayal, the fear, the way I almost lost her twice. But something deep inside me still felt unsettled. It wasn't just the trauma, it was something else. A few days later, a package arrived at our new address. No sender, no name, just our house number scribbled on top. I felt my heart stop for a moment. I called out to Emily, "Don't touch it!" We placed it on the kitchen table, staring at it like it was a bomb. The handwriting looked familiar, the same jagged strokes from those letters. I carefully opened it inside a plastic bag. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a small velvet box. Inside was a silver locket, the same kind I'd seen years ago, the one I thought Emily's mother had lost long ago. And inside the locket was a photo of Emily and her mother, taken when she was little, and a note that said, "She wanted you to have this." There was no signature, just that sentence. My hands trembled. I didn't understand. Was it from Mark or someone else who knew our story? Emily came closer, her eyes wide. "Dad, where did this come from?" I didn't know what to say. The package had no postage, no trace, as if it had just appeared there overnight. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there still watched us, not with hatred this time, but with something else, something unfinished. Whatever it was, our story wasn't done yet. The storm had passed, but I could sense the clouds gathering once more, quiet and distant, waiting for the right time to return. The next morning, the locket sat on the kitchen table like a silent question neither of us could answer. Emily kept staring at it, her fingers trembling as she traced the edges. "Dad," she whispered, "this is Mom's. I remember her wearing it the night before she passed away. How could it just appear here?" I had no explanation. I had packed all of her mother's belongings myself after the funeral. I was sure the locket had been buried with her wedding ring. The more I thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. The handwriting on the note still haunted me. Too clean, too deliberate, not Mark's. But if it wasn't him, then who? I called Officer Daniels and showed him the box. He took it to check for fingerprints, but later called saying, "Nothing. It's clean. Wiped perfectly." That only deepened the mystery. That night, after Emily went to bed, I sat alone, holding the locket under the lamp's warm light. I pressed the small latch, and it clicked open with a soft sound. Inside were the two photos, the same ones from years ago, but tucked behind them was something else, a folded piece of old paper. I carefully pulled it out. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was a hospital document, a birth record, but the name written under Mother wasn't my late wife's. It was someone else's name, one I didn't recognize. My eyes widened, heart pounding. The document listed Emily's birth date, but the details didn't match what I remembered. My wife's name was crossed out, as if someone had tried to erase it. I didn't know what to think. How could this be? Was it some kind of mistake or a cruel trick? I decided not to show Emily. Not yet. She'd been through enough already. But the question kept burning in my mind. Who was the woman on that paper? And why now? After all these years, was this surfacing? The next morning, I drove to the old hospital where Emily was born. It had changed names since then, but the archives were still there. I told the receptionist I needed to access an old record. She looked through the system and frowned. "Strange," she said. "This file has a restricted tag." Restricted? Why would a birth record be restricted? I waited while she called a supervisor. After a while, a gray-haired man came out and asked, "You're Mr. Jameson, right? Emily's father?" I nodded cautiously. He sighed and gestured toward his office. "There's something you should see." Inside, he pulled out an old file folder with faded writing and slid it across the desk. "This record was sealed shortly after the birth," he explained. "Your wife requested confidentiality." I blinked in confusion. "My wife? Why?" He hesitated. "It's not my place to say, but the file indicates the child was part of a closed adoption process that was later reversed." I stared at him in disbelief. "Adoption? What are you saying?" He lowered his voice. "Legally, Emily was adopted at birth, but soon after, your wife fought to revoke it. She must have had a reason." My breath caught in my throat. I had lived my whole life believing Emily was our biological daughter. How could my wife have kept something like that from me? When I drove home, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I didn't know how to tell Emily, or even if I should. She met me at the door, smiling faintly. "Dad, where were you? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just some errands, nothing important." But she studied me with those sharp eyes of hers, sensing something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every memory of my wife's pregnancy, how she avoided photos, how she refused to talk about the hospital days. I had always thought it was grief from her own family problems, but now it all made sense. There was something she never told me, and somehow that secret had found its way back through that mysterious package. The next morning, Emily found me sitting in the living room, still holding the locket. She said softly, "Dad, I had a dream last night. Mom was standing by my bed. She said, 'The truth will set you free.'" My heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath and handed her the folded paper. She unfolded it slowly, reading each line, her eyes widening until tears filled them. "Dad, what is this?" I told her everything I found, every word from the hospital. She sat there silent for a long time, staring at the paper. Her lips trembled. "So, I'm not your daughter?" The pain in her voice shattered me. I reached for her hand and said firmly, "You are my daughter, Emily. Nothing changes that. Blood doesn't make family. Love does." She cried into my arms, shaking uncontrollably. But I could tell this truth would not let her rest. She needed answers, just like I did. That evening, she made a decision. "Dad, I want to find her, the woman on this paper. I need to know who she is." I tried to stop her at first, but I saw that same fire in her eyes, the strength that had carried her through everything. "Then we'll find her together," I said. And so we did. We spent the next week searching records, calling numbers, visiting old neighborhoods. Finally, we found a trace. A small town 3 hours away. A woman named Catherine Miller, the same name on the birth record. When we reached her address, an old farmhouse stood quietly on the edge of a hill. The porch light was on, but the air felt still, heavy. I could feel Emily's hand shaking in mine as we walked up the steps. She knocked once, no answer. Then again. Finally, the door creaked open. An elderly woman with kind but tired eyes stood there. Her gaze moved from me to Emily and froze. Her lips parted as if she'd seen a ghost. She whispered, "Emily?" And before we could say a word, tears filled her eyes. She stepped back and said, "I've waited 25 years for this moment."
Emily stood frozen on the doorstep, staring at the old woman who seemed to know her name before she even spoke. The air around them felt charged, like time itself had stopped. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached out, hesitating halfway, then finally touching Emily's cheek. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You look just like her." Emily's brows furrowed. "Like who?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Like your mother, my daughter." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Your daughter?" I asked cautiously. She nodded slowly, inviting us inside.
The house smelled of old wood and lavender candles, photos covering every wall, some faded, some recent. On the mantel sat a single framed picture of a young woman holding a baby. I froze when I saw it. The woman in the photo looked almost identical to my late wife. Catherine noticed my reaction and gave a faint smile filled with sorrow. Her name was Laura, she said softly. She was my only child. She got pregnant very young. She was scared, alone, and the father, he was not a good man. Emily and I exchanged confused glances. Catherine continued. She wanted to give the baby a better life, so when the baby was born at the hospital, she arranged for adoption. She made sure the baby would go to a kind family, a woman named Emily Jameson. I felt my stomach twist. That was my wife's name. Catherine looked at me with recognition in her eyes. "You're her husband, aren't you?" I nodded slowly, my voice barely steady. "Anna never told me any of this." Catherine sighed deeply. She promised she would keep it secret until the right time, but maybe the right time never came. Emily's voice was shaking. "So, you're saying my biological mother was your daughter Laura, and Anna adopted me?" Catherine nodded, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Laura died in an accident just weeks after the adoption was finalized. She never got the chance to tell you how much she loved you." Emily covered her face, her body shaking with silent sobs. I sat beside her, placing my hand over hers. I could feel her pain radiating through every breath she took. Catherine handed her the locket we had received in the mail. "That belonged to Laura," she said softly. "I sent it after I found out where you were. I thought you should have something that connected you to her." I stared at her in disbelief. "You sent it? But how did you know our address?" Catherine hesitated, looking down. "I didn't at first, but someone helped me. A man came to my door 2 months ago. He said he knew Emily, that she was in trouble. He looked rough, tired, but he said he wanted to make things right." My blood ran cold. "What was his name?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Her voice trembled as she spoke it. "Mark." Emily gasped, her eyes wide. "He came here?" Catherine nodded. "He said he had done terrible things and wanted forgiveness. He asked about Laura's family records. I didn't know the whole story then. He just begged me to send the locket to Emily, to remind her she was loved." I felt my mind race in confusion. How could the same man who terrorized us also bring this connection to light? It didn't make sense. Catherine went on. "He said he was leaving town, that he wanted to disappear. I thought he meant he was turning himself in." Emily's voice cracked. "But that means he found my biological family before I did." We sat in silence, the only sound the ticking clock on the wall. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in ways none of us expected. Mark hadn't just been cruel. He had known something deeper, something about Emily's past. But how? Catherine reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope. "He left this for you," she said, handing it to Emily. "He said you'd understand when you read it." Emily hesitated, then unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the words and her breath hitched. She read out loud softly, "Emily, I never deserved you or the love you gave me. But before I met you, I worked for a man who knew your mother, a man who wanted to find the child that was given away. I didn't know who you were until after we married. When I found out, I panicked. I thought if you discovered the truth, you'd leave me like everyone else. So I lied. I hurt you. But the guilt never left me. I went back to your real grandmother and told her everything. Please forgive me for the pain I caused. I wanted to fix it, but I was too broken to try. I just wanted you to know you were never abandoned. You were always loved." The room fell silent again, except for the sound of Emily's quiet sobbing. She clutched the letter against her chest like it was the last piece of her heart that had been missing all these years. I sat there speechless, feeling both anger and an odd sense of closure. Mark's sins had destroyed so much, Yet somehow he had also uncovered the truth none of us would have ever found without him. Emily finally looked up, her eyes red but steady. "Dad, he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't abandoned. I was found, twice. Once by Mom and you, and now again." I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. I pulled her close and said softly, "And this time you'll never be lost again." Catherine smiled through her tears. "Laura would be so proud of you both." As the sun began to set behind the farmhouse, the golden light poured through the windows, bathing us in warmth. It felt like the ghosts of the past were finally at peace. But deep inside, I couldn't shake one thought. If Mark had known so much, who was the man he said he worked for? And why did he want to find Emily in the first place? There was still one last shadow left to uncover, and I had a feeling it wasn't done with us yet.
Emily held the letter tightly in her trembling hands, tears falling silently onto the faded ink. It was as if every unanswered question in her life had suddenly found its voice. Her whole world, the pain, the fear, the confusion, had been leading to this moment. Mark's final words were not just a confession, they were a bridge between her broken past and the truth she had been searching for all along. Catherine sat beside her, her wrinkled hands gently resting on Emily's knee. "Sweetheart, your mother never wanted to leave you," she whispered. "She fought to keep you safe. She just didn't have a choice." Emily looked up, her eyes glistening in the dim glow of the fireplace. "I wish I could have met her," she said softly. Catherine smiled sadly. "She's with you. Every time you choose kindness, every time you fight through pain, that's her living through you." I stood by the window, watching the sun dip below the hills, casting a golden hue over the quiet farmland. For the first time in years, I felt peace, slowly wrapping around me like a gentle blanket. The chaos, the guilt, the sleepless nights, they all seemed distant, as though the storm had finally moved on. But the question Mark left behind still echoed in my mind. Who was the man looking for Emily? As if fate was listening, there came a soft knock at the door. It startled us all. I stepped forward cautiously, opened the door, and there stood a man in a dark coat, mid-50s, sharp features but kind eyes. "Mr. Jameson?" he asked quietly. "Yes, who are you?" He handed me a small badge. "Detective Harold Lowe. I used to work with your wife, Anna." The name hit me like thunder. "You knew Anna?" He nodded. "Years ago. She came to me when she and Laura arranged the adoption. I was the one who helped them keep the records sealed. But recently, someone's been trying to unseal them. A private contractor using forged credentials. That's the man Mark worked for." Emily's face went pale. "But why would someone want to find me after all these years?" The detective sighed and took a small envelope from his coat. "Because of this. Your biological father, Laura's ex, wasn't just anyone. He was a wealthy businessman involved in some dark dealings. He died years ago, but before he did, he left behind a trust fund for any surviving heir. His associates have been searching quietly, not to give you the money, but to erase anyone who could claim it." I felt my stomach tighten. "You mean someone wants her dead?" He nodded grimly. "I believe so. Mark may have realized it too late. That's why he tried to warn you in his own twisted way." The words hung heavy in the air like poison. Emily's voice trembled. "So he wasn't just haunting me. He was trying to protect me at the end." The detective Lowe nodded. "He gave Catherine your address, but he also gave me something else." He reached into his pocket and handed Emily a small USB drive. He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure this reached you. Emily plugged it into her laptop and opened the single video file inside. Mark appeared on the screen, tired, unkempt, but sincere. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Emily, if you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. I don't expect forgiveness, but I couldn't let them hurt you. They were using me to find you because of your father's estate. I found out too late what they planned.
I wanted to run, but they would have killed us both. I'm sorry for everything I did. I loved you, even if I never knew how to show it. Protect yourself. Trust no one." The screen went black. Emily's shoulders shook as she cried silently. I felt tears blur my own eyes, too. I put my hand on her back and whispered, "He made terrible choices, but maybe in the end, he tried to make one right." The detective stood by the door, his voice firm. "We can help you, Emily, but you'll have to disappear for a while until this case closes. Witness protection, new name, new start." Emily looked at me, searching my eyes for an answer. I nodded slowly. "We've already started over once. We can do it again." Catherine hugged her tightly before we left. "You're your mother's daughter, strong and brave. Remember that." We packed only what we needed, just a few clothes, the locket, and the letter that started it all. As we drove away from the farmhouse, the sun was rising again, painting the sky with colors of hope and forgiveness. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding the locket close to her heart. She turned to me and said, "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud?" I smiled through my tears. "She's already is, baby. She always was." For a long time we drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead. But somewhere between the miles and the memories, I realized something powerful. The past may shape us, but it doesn't define us. Emily wasn't just a survivor. She was proof that love, broken, flawed, and painful as it may be, can still lead us home. As we crossed the state line and entered a new life, I looked at her and said softly, "This time we're not running from the past. We're driving toward our future." She smiled for the first time in what felt like forever, and in that moment I knew we were finally free. The ghosts of betrayal and pain were behind us, and ahead of us waited nothing but peace, a chance to live again, to love again, and to finally be whole. And as the morning sun lit up the highway, I felt Anna, Laura, and even Mark somewhere in that golden light, watching, forgiving, and letting us go.